What if the calm we call peace was never born from harmony, but from fear? What if the safety we cherish came not from love, but from our quiet surrender to power? Tonight, we drift again, not into chaos, but into the calm after fear. In the first chapter of our journey, humanity awoke trembling beneath the weight of its own nature. Fear had been our teacher, cold, honest, relentless. But as the storm passed, a new question lingered in the silence. How do we keep the night from returning? Thomas Hobbes believed the answer lay not in faith, but in construction, a deliberate creation of order so vast it could swallow our terror whole. From this idea, a new being began to rise, a mortal God, stitched together from the promises of men. It had no heart of its own, only the pulse we gave it, and we called it Leviathan. Fear taught us to think, but reason taught us to obey. And in that obedience, peace was born, fragile, radiant, and terribly expensive. So close your eyes, let your breath slow, and listen to the story of how we traded freedom for safety and found comfort in the shadow of the power we built. Tonight, we drift to a world where promises were born from fear. The air is still, heavy with the memory of chaos. The noise of war has quieted, yet the silence it leaves behind is louder than any cannon. In that silence, humankind begins to move again, not with certainty, but with trembling steps toward one another. Imagine a landscape scarred by centuries of conflict, villages turned to ash, faiths divided, every man a solitary island. The world that Hobbes inherited was not peaceful. It was exhausted. It had seen the price of pride, of divine wars, of men who claimed they could rule by the will of heaven. Beneath all this noise, Hobbes heard a deeper sound, the faint hum of fear that bound every human being together. He believed that fear, not love, is the first foundation of society. For when love fails, fear remains. It is the one emotion that touches us all equally, the beggar, the soldier, the king. Fear is honest. Fear does not pretend. It tells us that without each other, we are nothing but fragile bodies drifting in a violent sea. In the silence after war, Hobbes might have said, humanity whispered its first word, together, and in that whisper lay the beginning of a covenant. They did not come together out of goodness, but out of necessity. Each man had seen too much of solitude. The condition of man, Hobbes wrote, is a condition of war, of every man against every man. In such a state, there could be no art, no culture, no safety, only the raw pulse of survival. From this abyss, reason began to rise, like a thin thread of light breaking through storm clouds. What Hobbes saw was not despair, but the faint outline of order. He imagined fear not as the end of humanity, but as the soil from which peace could grow. Fear united them. Reason gave it a name. The name was covenant, a word that meant trust born not from love, but from the shared memory of pain. Picture 1,000 trembling candles, their flames bending in the same direction. Each one alone could be extinguished by a breath of wind. But together, they create light that resists the darkness. That light is what Hobbes called the social contract, the first fragile structure of order built upon the trembling ground of fear. As the night deepens, the world he describes feels familiar. We, too, have known the fatigue of conflict, the loneliness of distrust. In our own quiet ways, we still seek what they sought, a peace that will not disappear when the sun rises. Perhaps this is why Hobbes's vision endures, not as a cold theory, but as a mirror of the human condition. He does not ask us to be perfect. He only asks us to remember what happens when we are left alone with our desires. He tells us that peace is not a natural state. It is an achievement, a construction, a fragile bridge suspended over the chaos that lives in each of us. In his world, reason is not a philosopher's tool. It is a survival instinct. It teaches men to calculate their chances, to understand that a life of endless fear is worse than submission to law. It is by covenant only, Hobbes reminds us, that peace can be maintained. And so, mankind begins to sign the invisible pact. You will not harm me, and I will not harm you. The covenant does not erase fear, it transforms it. The same fear that once divided us now binds us together. Each person becomes both vulnerable and protected, both limited and free. This paradox, Hobbes believed, is the price of peace. As you listen now, imagine that same candlelight trembling across time. Imagine the voices of those first men and women, tired and afraid, reaching out in the darkness to say, "Enough." Their fear became their bond. Their reason became their map. And from the ruins of solitude, they began to build a world. The night of humanity's despair had ended, not because someone conquered, but because everyone surrendered, not to each other, but to something greater, the idea of order. Breathe. Let that thought settle. Even now, centuries later, the same truth remains. We live by the covenants we make, spoken and unspoken. We exist in the fragile calm that Hobbes once dreamed of, a calm born from fear, sustained by reason, and always one heartbeat away from breaking. So as you drift into rest tonight, remember this: peace is not the absence of fear. It is fear, tamed by trust, and like every flame in the dark, it survives only because we keep it alive together. The night after the covenant was born, the air grew still, not from exhaustion, but from fragile hope. Humanity had taken its first breath together, yet that breath trembled, uncertain of its own strength. Out of the silence, Hobbes saw something extraordinary beginning to form. Not a monument of stone, but an invisible architecture rising between hearts. He called it the social contract. It was not a treaty signed by kings, nor a document sealed with blood. It was simpler and far more profound. Each man looked upon another and thought, "Perhaps I can live if he does not harm me." In that small calculation of fear and reason, the foundation of peace was laid. Hobbes imagined it as a bridge suspended over the abyss, a narrow crossing built from the fragile materials of trust and necessity. He wrote, "The mutual transferring of right is that which men call contract. To live in peace, each person had to give up a fragment of their natural freedom, the wild right to take, to conquer, to destroy. Freedom in its purest form meant chaos. Safety in its truest form required surrender. The balance between these two became the heartbeat of civilization. Each breath of trust became a brick in the invisible wall of peace. It was not built overnight. It was not built by saints. It was built by those who were tired of fear. In Hobbes's world, every law, every government, every shared rule is a quiet promise whispered into the darkness. I will not be your enemy if you will not be mine. This idea, so gentle yet so absolute, redefined the meaning of power. It was no longer about who could rule, but about who could be trusted. Fear no longer ruled through swords. It ruled through understanding. Hobbes believed that in this fragile cooperation lay the only hope for lasting peace. Covenants without the sword are but words, he wrote. A reminder that even the most sacred promise requires strength to endure. In the world he imagined, the social contract became the great equilibrium between chaos and control. It was not perfection that united people, but the shared desire to survive without tearing each other apart. The invisible bridge they built was not made of faith, but of reason, of men deciding with clear minds and trembling hearts. That peace was worth the price of freedom. As your thoughts drift tonight, imagine that bridge stretching across the centuries. Each plank is a decision, each beam a breath of compromise. Beneath it, the abyss still waits, the chaos of selfish will, the ancient hunger for dominance. Above it, the air hums with quiet order, held aloft by the unseen weight of collective choice. Hobbes understood that safety and submission are twins born of the same fear. To be safe, he reasoned, is to agree not to be entirely free. In his philosophy, peace demands discipline, and order demands sacrifice. Yet he did not mourn this loss. He saw it as the moment humanity grew wise, the moment we realized that to master our fear, we must first obey it. There is a strange beauty in this surrender. It is not the submission of the weak, but the wisdom of the weary. Those who have known chaos understand that freedom without restraint is its own kind of prison, a restless wandering through endless danger. The covenant was our escape, not from fear itself, but from the loneliness it created. Close your eyes. Picture a city slowly forming in the darkness, walls rising not from stone, but from shared breath. Each promise glows faintly, like a candle lit in trust. Together, these lights weave into a pattern, the first shape of society. Within it, people no longer hide from one another. They begin to speak, to trade, to rest. The hum of survival softens into the rhythm of life. Still, Hobbes knew how delicate this architecture was. He warned that peace is never a gift. It must be built and guarded every day. The obligation of subjects to the sovereign, he said, lasts as long as the power by which he is able to protect them. Trust, in his eyes, was not eternal. It was conditional, breathing only as long as the structure of order held firm. And yet, in that fragility, there is grace. For what could be more human than to keep building, even knowing it may fall, to keep trusting, even knowing we could be betrayed? Hobbes believed that this act, this willingness to risk, was the truest form of courage. As you drift deeper into the quiet of this thought, let your breath follow the rhythm of his idea. Inhale the freedom we give. Exhale the peace we receive. This is the balance that built our world. Perhaps tonight, you too can feel it, that invisible bridge beneath your thoughts, holding you steady above the chaos. The social contract may be unseen, but it lives within every act of trust, every moment of restraint, every soft agreement between fear and reason. So breathe gently. The architecture still stands. And in every quiet corner of your life, with every unspoken promise you keep, you help rebuild the same fragile bridge that once saved us all. The covenant had been spoken into existence. Its rhythm echoed softly through the hearts of those who had made it. Men who once feared only each other now began to fear breaking their word. What was born as an act of survival was becoming something greater, something unseen yet deeply felt. In their search for safety, they had called order into being. And in that moment, order began to look back. The world Hobbes described was no longer a wilderness of endless fear. It was now a place where fear had shape, boundaries, and rules. The social contract, that fragile bridge built over chaos, had begun to solidify. But every bridge needs something to hold it in place. Without a force to bind their promises, men could easily return to war. Out of this quiet understanding, power was born. He wrote in Leviathan, "Covenants without a sword are but words." Peace required more than trust. It needed a guardian. The covenant alone could not enforce itself, for man's nature, Hobbes believed, is restless. Desire, ambition, envy. These movements of the soul never stop. Even the wisest heart trembles when temptation whispers. To preserve peace, the promise needed an enforcer, a power that could compel obedience without question. In every promise lies a seed of obedience. Hobbes understood that the act of agreement is never neutral. To say, "I trust you," is also to say, "I will yield to something larger than myself." That is the paradox of civilization. Each person gains protection by surrendering a fragment of freedom. Each law we obey is both a cage and a shield. The narrator's voice slows here, soft yet steady. Imagine the world at dawn, after centuries of darkness. The wind is calm. The air smells of new beginnings. And yet something heavy lingers beneath the silence. The awareness that freedom has changed. Humanity has stepped out of chaos, but also into the shadow of its own creation. Hobbes saw this shadow not as evil, but as necessary. He called it sovereign power, the artificial soul that would give life to the state. The multitude, he wrote, so united in one person, is called a commonwealth. This was no single man, no monarch of flesh and blood. It was a mind made of many minds, the first collective intelligence humanity ever imagined. It was not divine. It did not descend from heaven. It was built from fear, sustained by obedience, and guided by reason. And yet, it held a kind of holiness, not of spirit, but of necessity. Hobbes believed that this power, once created, must be absolute, or it would collapse back into chaos. To divide it would be to invite war again. To question it would be to reopen the door to fear. So the people who had once trembled in solitude now trembled together under a single idea, Leviathan. The philosopher's vision was both brilliant and unsettling. Power, in his view, was not a corruption of humanity, but its completion. For by art is created that great Leviathan, he wrote, which is but an artificial man. In those words lies one of the most haunting truths of political thought. We built a machine to keep ourselves safe, and then gave it a soul. As your breath slows, think of that image, an invisible giant rising slowly over the horizon. It is not born in fire or thunder, but in whispers and signatures. Every promise, every law, every surrender becomes a vein, a neuron, a spark in this new body of order. It does not walk, but it moves. It does not speak, but it commands. And yet, Hobbes does not speak of tyranny. He speaks of balance. The Leviathan exists not to crush men, but to bind them together, to hold the structure of trust so it does not crumble. Still, the weight of this creation cannot be ignored. In choosing safety, mankind also chose submission. In building peace, they built something that could rule even the hearts that made it. The narrator pauses, a quiet breath before reflection. Power, Hobbes reminds us, is not found in weapons or crowns, but in consent. The true ruler is not the king, but the agreement that made him king. Every time a person obeys a law, even silently, they give life to Leviathan again. Perhaps that is why Hobbes' philosophy still unsettles us today. It forces us to ask, do we serve power, or does power serve us? The answer, as always, lies somewhere in the middle, in the soft place between fear and reason. He saw clearly that humans crave order not because they are weak, but because they are wise. To survive, one must yield. To endure, one must trust. And in trusting, one inevitably obeys. It is not submission to a tyrant, but to the idea of peace itself. As night falls deeper, the boundaries between man and Leviathan blur. What began as a covenant among equals has become a structure that transcends them. Something vast began to rise, the narrator whispers. Not a man, but a mind made of many. It watches, it governs, it protects, and beneath its calm gaze, humankind rests, safe yet uneasy. The world has found its peace, but it is a peace that breathes through power. So, as you listen now, let this paradox settle gently in your thoughts. Every act of order carries the shadow of control. Every promise contains the seed of obedience. And every peace we build, no matter how gentle, stands upon the quiet surrender of our will. Tonight, the world sleeps under the watch of its own creation, and in that stillness, somewhere between safety and silence, the Leviathan begins to stir. The night after the covenant was sealed, a strange stillness fell upon the world. Humanity, for the first time, stood within the shelter of something greater than itself. They had tamed fear, chained chaos, and built a fragile peace upon the bones of reason. Yet, as dawn crept over the horizon, that peace began to take form, vast, silent, and watching. It was no longer an idea whispered between frightened men. It was becoming a being. Hobbes called it Leviathan. He wrote in his masterpiece, "For by art is created that great Leviathan called a commonwealth or state, which is but an artificial man." To him, the state was not merely an institution, it was a living organism, a mind made of many minds, a body made of countless bodies. It breathed through laws, it saw through authority, and it moved through the obedience of those who gave it life. The voice of the narrator softens, almost reverent. A body made of 1,000 bodies, breathing as one. Imagine this vast being stretching across the land, invisible yet omnipresent. Its heart beats through every contract. Its veins flow with the will of the people. Its hands reach through every law, and its eyes, those unseen eyes, watch over all. Hobbes saw it not as a monster, but as salvation. For in his time, peace itself felt like a miracle. They built peace and called it a god. The power of Leviathan did not come from divine right, nor from the heavens. It came from men, from their collective surrender of fear into trust and of freedom into order. Each person became a cell in this vast body, their individuality absorbed into something larger, safer, and colder. The king was not the true ruler. He was only the face of this enormous being. Behind his crown lay the collective heartbeat of mankind. Hobbes believed this fusion was both necessary and beautiful. The multitude so united in one person is called a commonwealth, he wrote, in which the sovereign is the soul. The body could not live without its soul, and the soul could not exist without the body. The people and the sovereign were one and the same, bound by reason, held together by fear, and driven by the instinct to survive. In his vision, power was not evil. It was organic. It was the natural evolution of human cooperation, the point where chaos matured into order. Without it, life would again dissolve into solitary struggle. But with it, humankind could build cities, write laws, create art, and rest beneath the shadow of protection. The narrator pauses, the tone hushed and meditative. Picture that moment in human history, the birth of something neither divine nor human, yet containing both. People could finally sleep without fear of the sword. They could walk among strangers and trust that law would guard them. The invisible hand of Leviathan rested gently upon them, promising safety at the price of submission. And yet, within that safety lay the first whisper of unease. In creating a being powerful enough to protect them, mankind had also created something powerful enough to rule them. The covenant that gave birth to peace had also planted the seed of dependency. Hobbes saw this clearly, that the same unity that freed us from chaos could also enslave us to order. For the safety of the people, he wrote, is the supreme law. But what happens when the guardian forgets the people it was meant to serve? The image of Leviathan remains haunting because it is familiar. Even today, we live within its body. Every system of government, every social order, every law we obey, they are the muscles and nerves of the same creature Hobbes envisioned. We may not see it, but we feel it. Its breath is the rhythm of our collective life. Its silence is the calm of our cities. Its movement is history itself. To Hobbes, this was not tyranny but truth. He did not dream of rebellion or utopia. He dreamt of survival. Without a common power to keep them all in awe, he warned, they are in that condition which is called war. He believed that peace required something absolute, a sovereign strong enough to bind men together, and feared enough to keep them from tearing the world apart again. As your breath slows, think of this philosophy not as politics, but as meditation on the human condition. Every choice we make between freedom and security echoes Hobbes's question. How much of ourselves must we surrender to feel safe? To be part of the Leviathan is to live both protected and possessed. To live outside, it is to face chaos alone. There is something profoundly human in that paradox, the longing for safety and the fear of control. Hobbes did not condemn this tension. He embraced it. He saw it as the heartbeat of civilization itself. Without fear, there is no obedience. Without obedience, there is no peace. And without peace, there can be no life worth living. So the people built peace and called it a god. They gave it their trust, their freedom, and their will. And as they slept beneath its shadow, the Leviathan opened its eyes. It was vast. It was calm. It was made of them. The narrator's voice fades into a whisper. Perhaps tonight, as you rest, you too can sense it, the quiet pulse of order moving through every human bond. You are part of it, as Hobbes said, a thought among thoughts, a cell among millions. The Leviathan breathes, and so do you. Peace hums softly in its chest, and within that rhythm, humanity still dreams of balance. The Leviathan now stood tall, vast, silent, and whole. Humanity had poured its fear, its trust, and its reason into this artificial being, and in return, it promised protection. Yet Hobbes understood what others could not. Every promise of safety carries a quiet cost. The breath that once whispered freedom now spoke a new word: obedience. Peace, Hobbes wrote, is not to free. It is built upon obedience. The tone softens, almost like a lullaby told in shadow. Imagine the great body of Leviathan shimmering in the early light, the faces of thousands forming its skin, their breath moving through its chest, their hopes pulsing through its veins. Each one of them, by signing the covenant, had offered something precious, the right to decide for themselves. In giving up that power, they gained peace. In surrendering, they were saved. Hobbes did not see this as tragedy. He saw it as necessity. Covenants without the sword are but words. Promises alone, he warned, cannot protect. Without a force to ensure obedience, the fragile bridge of peace would collapse into chaos once again. Thus, from the ashes of fear, sovereignty was born, a power absolute, undivided, and unchallengeable. He described it with clarity that chills and comforts all at once. The only way to erect such a common power is to confer all their power and strength upon one man, or one assembly of men, that may reduce all their wills by plurality of voices unto one will. In other words, many minds had to become one mind. Many desires had to become one law. Only then could peace survive. The narrator's voice deepens, calm, reflective, like the ocean before dawn. To be protected, you must obey. It is not a command, but an observation, a truth as steady as gravity. In Hobbes's world, the sovereign is not a tyrant born of cruelty, but an answer born of fear. The people, trembling in the ruins of war, needed something greater than themselves to bind them. They chose to give their will to a single authority, not because they were weak, but because they understood that freedom without control would always end in destruction. Hobbes compared this act to breathing. You inhale order, you exhale freedom. It is the rhythm of peace. For the laws of nature, he said, are contrary to our passions. Men, left alone, follow appetite and pride. Only under a sovereign can those passions be contained and redirected toward harmony. The Leviathan, then, was not just a body made of bodies. It was a will made of obedience. Its strength came not from violence, but from consent. The people, by yielding their power, created something that could now stand above them. Yet there is beauty in this surrender, if one listens closely. The surrender Hobbes described was not humiliation. It was a kind of trust. The trust that reason would prevail over chaos. To obey was to participate in the preservation of peace. It was to recognize that without a higher power to guide them, humans would drift endlessly in the current of fear and desire. The voice softens further, guiding the listener inward. To obey is not to lose yourself, Hobbes would have said, but to become part of something that endures. And yet, as the light of sovereignty spreads, so too does its shadow. Power, once created, develops its own hunger. The Leviathan, once a guardian, now stands as a god among men. It watches, protects, and demands. To be protected, you must obey. The phrase echoes again, but now with a different weight. Its comfort begins to cool into distance, its safety into silence. Still, Hobbes remains steadfast in his conviction. The alternative, he reminds us, is far worse. To live without a sovereign is to return to the state of nature, where every man is enemy to every man. In that world, there are no laws, no art, no progress, only fear and the endless anticipation of violence. Compared to that chaos, even the cold peace of Leviathan is mercy. The philosophy is not romantic. It is sober, pragmatic, and hauntingly human. Hobbes did not write for idealists. He wrote for those who had seen war, those who knew that safety must sometimes wear the face of authority. To obey was not to be enslaved, but to survive. As your thoughts drift, imagine standing before that immense figure, not a monster, not a man, but an idea incarnate. Its silence feels like calm. Its stillness feels like law. You can almost hear the faint hum of order in its chest, the quiet pulse of civilization that beats because people chose to bow. It is a strange comfort to know that you no longer have to fight alone. But in that comfort lies a whisper of unease. For if peace depends on obedience, what becomes of the soul that questions? Hobbes' answer was clear. Peace demands restraint, not rebellion. The Leviathan's peace is not warm, but steady, not free, but safe. And perhaps, for those who have lived too long in fear, that is enough. The voice grows softer, fading toward reflection. Peace is not free. It is built upon obedience. That sentence, like a heartbeat, repeats through centuries. It asks no allegiance, only understanding. To obey, in Hobbes' sense, is to participate in a collective dream. The dream of safety, of order, of civilization itself. And yet, it reminds us that every dream of control carries the faint scent of surrender. So breathe quietly. Feel the slow rhythm of structure surrounding you. The laws, the systems, the silent protections that make your world calm enough to sleep. You are both maker and subject of the Leviathan. The peace you rest in tonight was not given. It was built upon fear, upon reason, upon obedience, and somewhere in that vast stillness between protection and submission, Hobbes' truth continues to hum. To be protected, you must obey. The covenant had been sealed. The Leviathan stood vast and unwavering, and humanity exhaled in relief. The wars had ended. The chaos that once tore villages apart had dissolved into silence. But in that silence, something new began to take shape, a quiet, invisible pressure. Peace had arrived, but it carried weight. It pressed softly upon every thought, every motion, every breath. The air is still, the narrator whispers, yet heavy with protection. From a distance, the world seemed calm, Roads were safe. Voices obeyed. The laws that once felt distant now pulsed through every heartbeat. People no longer feared one another. They feared disobedience. The sword of Leviathan, unseen but always present, hovered above them like a silent guardian. This was the peace Hobbes envisioned, built not on faith or love, but on structure and awe. He had written with clarity that still unsettles the modern mind. Covenants without the sword are but words. In his view, it was not enough to desire peace. One must enforce it. Without power, laws were only whispers in the dark. Yet the more peace became secure, the more obedience became instinct. It was no longer chosen, it was breathed. Hobbes did not mourn this. He accepted it as the nature of survival. In his world, peace and control are not enemies, they are twins, born from the same mother, fear. To be protected, you must obey, he had said. And now that obedience thickened the air like mist before dawn, the narrator's tone deepens, reflective, slow, meditative. Picture a city under the Leviathan's gaze. The streets are empty but ordered. The walls stand firm. The night is quiet. No one raises their voice, not from oppression, but from habit. It is as if the soul of the people has learned to move in rhythm with the sovereign's will. Every act of obedience feeds the great machine. Every silence keeps it alive. And yet, in that calmness lies an unease too delicate to name. The peace feels perfect, perhaps too perfect. The stillness no longer feels like rest, but like restraint. The people have traded noise for quiet, freedom for safety, chaos for control. Hobbes understood this tension better than anyone. He never promised a paradise. He promised survival. His philosophy does not paint a utopia. It describes a system that works because it reflects what we are. Humans are creatures of desire, he said. Always reaching, always fearing, always competing, left alone. These instincts clash. Only a power greater than any individual can hold them together. The Leviathan is that power, a body made of obedience. Its strength is the submission of those within it. Its breath is the law. The air is still, yet heavy with protection. The stillness that once soothed now begins to press down gently on the spirit. To live under Leviathan is to exist in a delicate balance between gratitude and surrender. One feels safe, but not entirely free, peaceful, but slightly numb. The protection is real as the weight that comes with it. The narrator pauses, letting the quiet expand. Hobbes did not see this as corruption, but as truth. He believed that fear is the first teacher of wisdom, and obedience is the discipline that sustains it. Without obedience, the world fractures. Without fear, the world forgets the cost of peace. His vision is not one of cruelty, but of realism. He looked at mankind, ambitious, anxious, full of restless energy, and knew that without the steady hand of control, we would destroy the very peace we long for. He once wrote, "The condition of man is a condition of war of everyone against everyone." The Leviathan, in his eyes, was the cure, not perfect, but necessary. As the listener drifts deeper, the narration softens into reflection. Imagine lying beneath that vast, invisible presence, the hum of civilization surrounding you like low, constant breath. Every law, every boundary, every act of obedience is part of the rhythm. It does not crush you. but it reminds you, peace is not weightless. It must be carried. There is comfort in that weight, if one listens closely. It is the weight of walls that protect you, the weight of systems that hold your world in place. It is the gentle gravity of belonging, the knowledge that your safety depends on the trust of millions who obey the same silent rules. But like all forms of gravity, it can also confine. The freedom to move is shaped by the very laws that keep you safe. Hobbes did not seek to free us from that paradox. He asked us to understand it. To live under Leviathan is to live in acceptance, not of domination, but of necessity. The peace we desire will always demand something in return. The narrator's tone becomes almost a whisper. Peace and control are two sides of the same breath. This is where chapter 2 closes, not in fear, but in contemplation. The Leviathan stands tall, serene, and eternal. Humanity, sheltered beneath its gaze, has finally found rest. Yet somewhere, in that perfect silence, the faint question lingers: what part of ourselves have we given away for the privilege of peace? The air remains still. The protection remains heavy. And within that weight, civilization continues to breathe. Slowly, rhythmically, obediently. As the night deepens, the voice fades into calmness. The air is still, yet heavy with protection. Breathe with it. Feel its gravity. Know that this, too, is part of being human. To surrender a little, to be safe, to let the world hold you in its quiet order. And as the mind softens into stillness, peace and control dissolve into one final exhale. The Leviathan watches over all, silent and unmoving, and under its gaze, the world, for now, sleeps. The air of obedience still lingered, calm, thick, and unmoving. Under the quiet weight of Leviathan, humanity had found stability, though not quite freedom. Fear no longer roamed the streets. It had been transformed into structure, into the invisible rhythm of law. The chaos of war had dissolved, but its memory lived on, written carefully into every rule that now governed life. Each law, the narrator whispers, is a promise not to return to the storm. The world that Hobbes imagined was not perfect, but it was breathing. Each statute, each decree, each act of obedience became a soft exhale, the collective breath of civilization itself. Laws, to Hobbes, were not chains. They were lungs. They kept the body of society alive, drawing in order, releasing fear. Without them, Leviathan would suffocate. In Leviathan, Hobbes wrote, "The law is the public conscience by which all men are governed." It was not morality he sought to define, but survival. Laws were the translation of fear into peace, the written form of the covenant itself. To obey them was not submission, but affirmation, a reminder that reason had conquered chaos. The narrator's tone slows, each word gliding like a deep breath before sleep. Picture a city under the Leviathan's protection, its streets lit by the glow of stillness, its people moving quietly through the rhythm of daily life. No one raises their voice. No one fears the knock at the door. There is a kind of music in the silence, the hum of order, the soft pulse of justice. Justice, for Hobbes, was not divine or emotional. It was mechanical, the alignment of human will with human law. To break the law, he believed, is to break the very peace that gives you life. Justice was not an ideal. It was a function. It was the breath that kept the great body of Leviathan alive. Each law, he might have said, is a breath, a rhythm that keeps the storm asleep. In his eyes, justice was not born from compassion, but from the logic of necessity. The world had learned through pain and fear that peace was too fragile to survive without rules. The laws of nature, the instinct to seek peace, to fulfill covenants, to respect others, had to be codified, carved into something permanent. Hobbes called them the laws of nature, but they were not divine commandments. They were, in his words, precepts of reason. To live peacefully was to live rationally. To disobey law was not only to defy authority, but to betray one's own reason, to fall back into the primal chaos from which humanity had escaped. As the narrator speaks, the tone becomes gentler, almost hypnotic. The idea unfolds like a breath. Inhale, the making of law. Exhale, the peace that follows. The cycle repeats, steady and eternal. In Hobbes's world, law is not something to fear, but something to breathe with. It gives rhythm to the collective heart. It keeps the pulse of society from racing toward panic. To those who lived under Leviathan, this was the deepest comfort. For once, they no longer needed to guard their homes with suspicion, no longer needed to fight for every crumb of safety. The laws spoke for them. They carried the memory of terror so that the people could finally rest. Yet, in the stillness, the faint echo of dependence lingers. If laws keep the storm away, what happens when they are broken? What happens when the breath of justice falters? Hobbes knew the answer. It was the return of the state of nature, the unraveling of all that reason had built. For where there is no law, he wrote, there is no injustice. It was both a warning and a truth. Without the breath of law, peace dies silently. The narrator pauses. The stillness deepens. Justice, in Hobbes's eyes, is not about fairness. It is about survival. Laws do not promise happiness, only continuation. They are the quiet boundaries that allow civilization to exist. In obeying them, man chooses life over chaos, reason over instinct, order over noise. The tone softens further, guiding the listener toward reflection. Breathe slowly, it says. Feel the weight of structure, the calm of boundaries, the quiet hum of peace. Every rule you live by, from the simplest courtesy to the grandest constitution, is part of the same breath that began centuries ago when humanity first whispered, "Together, peace, written in fear, spoken through law." It is not the peace of innocence nor of freedom. It is the peace of understanding that safety requires restraint and order requires obedience. Hobbes did not ask for a world without conflict. He asked for one that could endure it. In his world, law is not a prison, but a heartbeat, the pulse of reason echoing through time. As the story drifts toward silence, the air feels warm and heavy with calm. The Leviathan still breathes, slow, steady, eternal. Each law it speaks is a sigh of remembrance, a promise that the storm will not return. The narrator whispers softly, "Each law is a promise not to return to the storm." Let that thought rest in your mind like a gentle rhythm. Let it slow your pulse. The chaos outside these walls cannot reach you here. not while reason still breathes through the laws of peace. And as your eyes grow heavy, remember Hobbes' quiet truth. Peace is not given, it is maintained. One breath, one law, one promise at a time. The breath of justice had settled into rhythm. Laws moved through the world like quiet tides, shaping life without sound. The storm had passed. Humanity was safe. Yet beneath this peace, another question began to form. Not loud, not rebellious, but curious. What does it mean to be free under Leviathan? The voice of the narrator slows, warm and meditative, as if to cradle the thought before it fades. Hobbes knew this question would come. He anticipated it centuries before others dared to ask. His answer, though simple, carried a gravity of truth. The liberty of a subject lieth only in those things which the sovereign hath passed over. In other words, we are free where Leviathan allows us to be free. To the modern ear, it sounds unsettling, but to Hobbes, it was the only way peace could endure. True freedom, he believed, was not the absence of restraint, but the assurance that the restraints would hold, that the fragile walls of order would not crumble into violence again. Freedom is not the absence of chains, the narrator whispers. It is knowing they will not break. This is the calm center of Hobbes' philosophy. It is not rebellion that keeps us safe, but acceptance. The people under Leviathan's rule have no right to overthrow him, no permission to challenge his authority. To do so would unravel the covenant itself, the one fragile agreement that keeps civilization breathing. Yet, in return, they gain something deeper than freedom: security, the right to live without fear, the right to close one's eyes at night and know the world will still be whole by morning. The narrator pauses, letting the stillness grow thick, like fog over a sleeping city. It is a strange kind of peace, the peace of surrender, not victory. Hobbes saw it as wisdom, not submission. For the safety of the people, he wrote, is the supreme law. The sovereign exists for that purpose alone, to protect. The citizens exist not as subjects of a tyrant, but as organs within the great body of Leviathan, vital, dependent, secure. In this design, no man is above the law, not even the sovereign himself, for the sovereign is the law. He is the will of all made singular, the voice of reason that speaks on behalf of every fearful heart. His authority is absolute, not because he desires control, but because human nature cannot sustain peace without it. To Hobbes, rebellion was not a path to freedom, but a return to chaos. Once you strike at Leviathan, you strike at your own protection. He that complaineth of injury from his sovereign complaineth of that whereof he himself is the author. He wrote, to resist the power you created is to betray the fear that once saved you. The narrator's tone softens further, as if speaking to the listener directly. Imagine living in such a world, quiet streets, laws like soft walls around you, the hum of peace flowing steady through your days. You cannot move wherever you wish, but you no longer have to look over your shoulder. The freedom is limited, but it is safe. You breathe, and the Leviathan breathes with you. This is not the freedom of wild fields or open oceans. It is the freedom of shelter, of knowing that even in stillness, you are protected. Hobbes believed that the cost of absolute security is the surrender of absolute freedom. And yet, he argued, That is not a loss. It is a trade, one that turns chaos into civilization, fear into peace. In Leviathan, he calls this state the condition of security, where obedience is no longer a burden, but a form of trust. The obligation of subjects to the sovereign lasts as long as the power lasteth by which he is able to protect them. Thus, protection is not only a right, it is the foundation of all rights. The narrator breathes out the next words slowly, like a sigh of relief. To be protected, you must obey, or to be obeyed, the sovereign must protect. This balance, delicate as glass, is what Hobbes called justice. The people submit not out of love, but out of reason. For in the calculus of survival, safety always outweighs pride, and the sovereign governs not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. For his power is only as strong as his ability to preserve life. It is here that Hobbes's philosophy reaches its quiet beauty. In his world, peace is not a moral victory, but an equilibrium, a stillness born from mutual dependence. You obey because you wish to live. You are protected because you obey. The cycle is complete. And within that cycle, you rest. The voice fades softer, drawing the listener inward. This is not a freedom to run wild, but a freedom to rest without fear. It is not the freedom to destroy, but the freedom to endure. It is the stillness of knowing that the chaos outside has been contained, not destroyed, but tamed by reason. Freedom is not the absence of chains, it is knowing they will not break. Let that thought rest in your mind, quiet as the air after rain. The chains of Leviathan are not made of iron, they are made of trust. They are the silent bonds that hold humanity together when every other force fails. They are the breath of order, the rhythm of law, the heartbeat of peace. As the narrator's voice fades into the calm of night, the listener is left with the sense of vastness, of a world that no longer needs to fight, only to breathe. The storm has passed, the walls are steady, the air is still. Freedom remains, not wild, but safe, not boundless, but unbroken. And as the world sleeps beneath Leviathan's watch, reason hums quietly through the darkness, soft, steady, eternal. The air was calm now. The rhythm of obedience had become natural, like breathing. The laws moved quietly through the world, shaping it without effort. People lived under the shelter of order, sleeping in the confidence that the Leviathan was watching. Peace had finally become habit, not an aspiration, but a condition of existence. And yet, beneath that stillness, a quiet paradox began to take form. Hobbes had promised safety, and he had delivered it. But in the very heart of safety, a strange weight persisted. Peace, so deeply desired, began to feel like something else, not oppression, not cruelty, but a soft kind of restraint. The narrator's voice slows, almost tender, like someone speaking to a half-forgotten truth. To keep the peace, one must silence the storm, even within. The chaos that once roared outside had been subdued. But what of the chaos inside? The Leviathan had tamed nations. But could it tame the restlessness of the human soul? Hobbes knew it could not. He had written that man's desires are endless, that there is no finis ultimus, no ultimate aim, nor summum bonum, greatest good, as is spoken of in the books of the old moral philosophers. The hunger for more never ends. It only grows quiet when fear teaches it to whisper. This, then, is the gentle tyranny of peace, the realization that in gaining safety, mankind has also lost the fire of struggle. The same fear that once forged unity now sustains stillness. Every passion that once built civilization is subdued under the promise of security. Hobbes did not see this as tragedy. He saw it as the cost of endurance. To live without fear, one must live without chaos. And to live without chaos, one must give up a part of oneself, the unruly, dreaming, unpredictable part that refuses to obey. For the safety of the people, he wrote, is the supreme law. Safety above all, even above the pulse of freedom. The narrator pauses, allowing the silence to deepen like a slow breath. It is a beautiful stillness, but it is not light. It hums with the faint vibration of something restrained, something almost forgotten. Peace has become so complete that even the storm within must sleep. Freedom, Hobbes would have reminded us, is not the absence of chains. It is knowing they will not break. In the Leviathan's peace, this truth takes on new meaning. The chains have become invisible. They no longer bind by force, but by acceptance. People obey, not because they must, but because they cannot imagine a world without laws that protect them. The voice lowers, gentle and reflective. It is easy to mistake quiet for happiness. Easy to believe that peace, once achieved, will feel like liberation. But peace, in Hobbes's world, is not joy. It is balance. It is the quiet heartbeat of a society that dares not wake the chaos sleeping in its memory. In this world, to dream too loudly is to disturb the calm. To question too deeply is to shake the walls that keep order intact. Even thought becomes measured, cautious, obedient, a reflection of the very power that built the peace it serves. The Leviathan does not demand faith or worship. It demands stillness. It does not rage. It does not punish. It simply exists, vast, steady, unblinking. And so the people learn to quiet their own storms, to match the stillness of their protector. To keep the peace, one must silence the storm, even within. These words echo like a lullaby, comforting but tinged with melancholy. For the storm, though silenced, never disappears. It waits. It listens. It remembers what it means to move freely. Hobbes understood this deeply. The very reason peace must be maintained with such strength is because human nature itself is restless. He wrote that the passions that incline men to peace are fear of death, desire of such things as are necessary to commodious living, and a hope by their industry to obtain them. Fear, desire, and hope, these three forces make us human. And under Leviathan, they are not destroyed, they are managed. The price of peace is not extinction, but containment. The narrator breathes the next words softly, like a closing prayer. There is a kind of serenity in that containment, a recognition that freedom is not always found in movement, but sometimes in stillness. To live under the gentle tyranny of peace is to accept that the storm within you will never vanish, but that you no longer have to fight it. The calm that Hobbes envisioned is not a silence imposed by cruelty, but one chosen by exhaustion. Humanity has fought too long, feared too much. Now, it chooses quiet. It chooses the safety of structure over the uncertainty of freedom. It chooses to rest beneath the weight of its own creation, and so the world breathes as one. The Leviathan watches, neither kind nor cruel. The people move, not in defiance, but in rhythm. Each breath a repetition of the covenant that built this order. Fear has become peace. Obedience has become nature. The voice fades to a hush. Perhaps in this stillness there is wisdom. Perhaps peace, even if heavy, is better than the endless storm. Hobbes never promised joy, only survival. He offered not paradise, but permanence. A world where the storm sleeps and man can finally close his eyes without dread. The air remains calm. The laws hum quietly. The Leviathan stands unmoved, and in the silence between heartbeats, one truth endures: to keep the peace. One must silence the storm, even within. The stillness of peace had become so deep, so complete, that it began to resemble something sacred. People no longer spoke of Leviathan as an invention of man, but as something more, a being that stood above them, silent yet omnipresent, vast yet invisible. The storm had long been gone, but its echo still haunted the memory of humankind. Out of that echo, reverence was born. The narrator's voice softens, like a whisper through candlelight. Close your eyes. Imagine power so vast, it no longer needs to raise its voice. In this world, Leviathan was no longer just a system, a political structure, or a sovereign ruler. It had become something transcendent, a god of order born from the ashes of fear. Hobbes never meant it to be divine, yet he understood the human heart too well. He knew that anything capable of ending fear would inevitably be worshipped. For what is faith, if not the quiet trust that the unknown will not destroy you? They gave it their fears, and it returned as faith. That is the secret transformation at the heart of Hobbes's vision. Humanity, in surrendering to Leviathan, did not lose its soul, it redirected it. The fear that once tore men apart became the glue that bound them together. Their submission became devotion, their obedience became belief. It was not religion in the old sense, not prayer, not ritual, but something deeper, a spiritual acceptance of the necessity of power. There is no greater God than safety, the narrator continues, the tone calm, hypnotic. For in safety lies the promise that tomorrow will still come, that the walls will not fall, that the world will not revert to the chaos of before. Hobbes called this the mortal God, a phrase that carried both awe and warning. In Leviathan, he wrote, "For by authority given him by every man in the commonwealth, he hath the use of so much power and strength conferred on him, that by terror thereof he is enabled to conform the wills of them all to peace at home, and mutual aid against their enemies abroad." To live under this mortal God was to live within a paradox. One was protected, but also possessed. The same force that shielded humanity from destruction now governed every movement, every thought, every breath of obedience. Yet to most, this was not oppression, it was deliverance. It was the quiet comfort of knowing that chaos had been tamed, that life had structure, that the vast machinery of the world moved with purpose. The narrator pauses, then lets the next words drift slowly. Humanity had built a God, not out of heaven's light, but out of human reason and fear. This God didn't demand worship, it simply was. It needed no altar, no temple, no song. Its sanctuary was the law, its prayer was silence, In that silence, people found peace. In that peace, they found safety. And in that safety, they found something that felt like faith. It is here that Hobbes's philosophy turns from politics to psychology. He saw what others refused to see, that the desire for protection is inseparable from the instinct to worship. The human mind seeks guardianship. It wants to believe in something stronger, something that will hold the world together when it feels itself breaking apart. For the people of Leviathan, that belief was no longer in gods above, but in the order they themselves had created. There is no greater God than safety. The words float like a mantra, soothing and unsettling at once. The peace that Hobbes imagined was not spiritual redemption, it was a bargain with fear. In that bargain, men traded their divine freedom for earthly security. They built a God not from heaven, but from necessity. To Hobbes, this was not blasphemy, it was clarity. He believed that fear of power invisible, feigned by the mind or imagined from tales publicly allowed, is religion. Not allowed, superstition. Leviathan, in this sense, became the rational God, the only one that could be proven to exist, because it was made by human hands. The narrator's tone deepens, drawing the listener inward, almost to the edge of a dream. You can almost hear the heartbeat of this creation, not divine thunder, but the low hum of civilization itself. Streets alive with quiet movement, cities breathing in unison. The fear that once screamed in the dark now hums softly beneath the rhythm of law. And yet, something in this peace feels ancient, even sacred. The people no longer pray for deliverance, they live within it. They no longer ask the heavens for mercy. They have given that power to their own creation. Hobbes's Leviathan is not a tyrant by cruelty, but by necessity. It demands nothing more than belief in its permanence. To question it is to question safety. To doubt it is to invite fear back into the world. And so, they remain silent. The narrator breathes softly before the final reflection. In this silence lies both peace and danger. The peace of protection, the danger of forgetting where power comes from. The Leviathan was born from human fear, sustained by human faith, and obeyed through human reason. But in the comfort of its shadow, man begins to forget that he was the one who built it. They gave it their fears, and it returned as faith. Perhaps that is the deepest truth of Hobbes's vision, that even in a world ruled by reason, man's heart still seeks a God, and if heaven remains silent, he will build one himself. The air fades into stillness again. The voice lowers to a whisper, serene yet heavy with awe. The world rests beneath its creation, calm and contained. The Leviathan breathes quietly in the dark, not as a monster, but as a God made of men. There is no greater God than safety. The storm is gone. The voices are quiet. And in this silence, wholly human and fragile, peace has finally become eternal. The silence of reverence still lingered, like incense in a vast, unseen temple. Humanity had built its God not from fire or light, but from law. The Leviathan now stood above all, not in heaven, but in the hearts and habits of men. Its presence was not worshipped in song, but felt in the quiet discipline of daily life. From this silence, a new theology began to form, not of miracles, but of reason. It was a faith without prayer, a devotion without saints. Hobbes called it the kingdom of reason under the mortal God. It was the religion of order. They did not pray for salvation, they obeyed for peace. The narrator's voice slows, low and steady, almost indistinguishable from a breath. In Hobbes's world, obedience was not submission, it was alignment. To obey was to participate in the great design of safety, to flow with the rhythm of law instead of against it. Salvation was no longer something to be earned in the afterlife. It was granted here, in the simple continuity of survival. Hobbes believed that the state was the true church, not because it replaced God, but because it governed the space in which human life could exist. He wrote, "The kingdom of God is acquired by covenant." In the same way, the covenant that created Leviathan became a sacred pact. The state was divine not in spirit, but in function. It kept chaos away. The narrator lets the words stretch softly into the air. There is no need for miracles where law prevails. And perhaps that is what makes Hobbes so haunting. His God does not descend from above. It rises from below, built from fear, reason, and necessity. This is not theology in the traditional sense. It is a theology without mystery, where faith is replaced by understanding and obedience becomes a form of meditation. People did not kneel before Leviathan because they were forced to. They did so because they feared the alternative. Chaos was the only true hell, and law the only true heaven. The only way to erect such a common power, Hobbes wrote, is to confer all their power and strength upon one man or upon one assembly of men, that may reduce all their wills by plurality of voices unto one will. The narrator pauses, allowing the meaning to sink in. To live under Leviathan was to live under unity, the peace of one voice speaking for all. In that unity, the boundaries between politics and theology began to blur. Leviathan became both ruler and priest, judge and guardian. Its justice was absolute, its presence constant, its word final. They did not pray for salvation, they obeyed for peace. It is strange, and yet somehow calming. In a world that once trembled with endless conflict, this obedience feels almost like faith. People no longer prayed for deliverance because they no longer needed to. Deliverance had already come, not through divine grace, but through human reason. Hobbes saw this as the completion of history's oldest longing, the search for security. He understood that the heart of religion was never just about God. It was about order, about the comfort of knowing that someone, somewhere, was in control. Leviathan fulfilled that longing perfectly. The narrator's voice deepens into a thoughtful calm. In this theology of order, faith is not blind. It is rational. It is the belief that reason, when made absolute, can silence fear more completely than prayer ever could. There are no rituals here, no confessions, no blessings, only law. Law as scripture, law as mercy, law as the voice that replaces the divine. Hobbes's Leviathan is not a god of love, but of protection. It asks for no devotion, only trust. It promises no paradise, only survival. And yet, that promise is enough, because for Hobbes, survival is the highest good. The right of nature, he wrote, is the liberty each man hath to use his own power for the preservation of his own life. Leviathan merely institutionalizes that right, transforms it into peace. The tone grows softer, almost like a hymn murmured through reason, In this peace, men found stillness. The wars of belief were over. The fires of chaos were extinguished. The gods that once divided humanity had fallen silent, and in their place stood a single, vast, quiet order. A world governed by law instead of faith. Yet this peace was not passionless. It carried the dignity of something sacred, the solemn weight of necessity. People did not need to believe in miracles anymore. The greatest miracle had already happened. Humanity had learned to govern itself. Hobbes, ever the realist, did not pretend this system was perfect. He only believed it was possible. For the laws of nature, he said, are immutable and eternal. They are not divine commands, but rational truths, born from the same instinct that makes a heart beat, the instinct to live. The narrator breathes out the final lines slowly, each word like a drop of rain on still water. Peace has become prayer. Law has become faith. Order has become God. They did not pray for salvation. They obeyed for peace. This is the theology of Leviathan, not of angels and heavens, but of structure and silence. A faith that does not look upward, but inward, not toward eternity, but toward endurance. And in that quiet understanding, Hobbes found a kind of redemption, not of the soul, but of the world itself. The music fades into a deep, steady hum, like the slow exhale of a sleeping giant. The Leviathan rests, the people rest, and reason, calm, absolute, eternal, watches over them all. The voice of order still hummed softly through the world. The Leviathan stood unshaken, vast, calm, eternal, and under its shadow, humanity rested. The air was still, almost holy. The sound of obedience had become the rhythm of life itself. For a time, it seemed as though the story of fear had found its end in peace. But peace, if held too tightly, begins to whisper. The narrator's tone grows gentler, slower, as though the words themselves hesitate to disturb the stillness. Beneath the serenity, something subtle begins to stir. Not rebellion in action, but in thought. The kind of unrest that moves silently through the mind before it ever reaches the tongue. They did not pray for salvation. They obeyed for peace. And yet, somewhere deep within, a quiet question began to rise. What is peace if it costs the soul its motion? It began not with noise, but with silence, the kind that lingers after the world has grown too calm. The Leviathan had built perfect order, and yet, in that perfection, man began to feel the echo of his own absence. The same fear that once bound humanity together now began to take a new form. The fear of what they had become. Hobbes foresaw this paradox. He wrote that covenants without the sword are but words. But what happens when a sword no longer protects from enemies, only from the self? What happens when safety itself becomes the cage? The voice lowers, steadier as a slow heartbeat. We are safe now, but from what we have become, there is no safety. This is not the rebellion of fire or blade. It is the rebellion of awakening. The soft realization that perhaps humanity, in escaping the chaos of nature, has imprisoned something essential within. The Leviathan had promised to protect them from fear, and it did. But in doing so, it taught them to forget the value of uncertainty. The wild, unpredictable pulse that once made life feel alive. Under the calm, people began to dream, not of freedom, but of movement, of breath that was not measured, of voices that could rise without permission. The rebellion was not shouted, it was breathed. It existed in the small pauses between laws, in the lingering thought that peace might not be the final truth. Hobbes would not have condemned them for this feeling. He understood that even within the most ordered system, the human heart remains restless. Desire, he said, is the first and last of all motions, and so long as desire survives, so too does the possibility of rebellion, not against rulers, but against the stillness that forgets what it means to live. The narrator's tone grows warmer, as if confiding a secret. Perhaps this is the nature of all great creations. The moment they reach perfection, they begin to invite imperfection back in, not as a threat, but as a reminder. The still water longs for ripples. The quiet mind longs for thought. Even peace, in its purest form, begins to ache for change. And so the silent rebellion begins, not outside the walls, but within them. It starts in the small, unspoken doubts that move through the hearts of those who once believed. A sigh too long, a glance that lingers, a thought that refuses to dissolve. Each one a flicker of something ungoverned. The music, faint and fluid, begins to drift like mist. The voice follows it, low and contemplative. They had built a god of reason, but perhaps they had given it too much of themselves. The Leviathan no longer needed to command. Its power was sustained by habit, by acceptance, and yet, in every obedient heart, a faint tremor remained, the trace of an older instinct, one that remembered motion, uncertainty, risk. This is not disobedience. It is the gentle return of curiosity. The question that every civilization must face: can we be safe and still be human? We are safe now, but from what we have become, there is no safety. The narrator pauses long enough for the silence itself to speak. In that silence, one can almost hear it, the pulse of humanity beneath the machinery of order. Not loud, not violent, just steady, patient, waiting. A reminder that peace, too, must breathe, must change, must renew itself, or else it will harden into the very fear it sought to destroy. Hobbes's vision, though built upon obedience, carries this unspoken truth. No law, however just, can quiet the hunger of the soul forever. Leviathan can command bodies, but not dreams. It can shape the rhythm of life, but not the whisper that moves beneath it. And so, the silent rebellion becomes part of the order itself, a necessary tension, a quiet heartbeat beneath the calm. It does not destroy the Leviathan, it sustains it. For even perfect peace needs contrast to remain alive. The narrator's tone falls into a soft exhale, the kind that blends with the night's stillness. Maybe this was always Hobbes's unspoken wisdom, that fear and order, chaos and peace must coexist. That the mind, no matter how disciplined, must never stop questioning the walls that protect it. As the music spreads thin like mist, the world of Hobbes fades into twilight. The Leviathan still breathes, vast, calm, unbroken, but in the stillness of that breath, something human stirs again. Not defiance, not rebellion, just remembrance. The faint sound of a heartbeat, the trace of motion in the dark. The voice fades to a whisper, tender and final. We are safe now, but from what we have become, there is no safety. And then, Only silence remains. The silence that holds both obedience and freedom, fear and hope. The silence that prepares the soul for what comes next. The music dissolves slowly, leaving a space for thought and for sleep. The silence left behind by rebellion was not destruction. It was reflection. The great Leviathan still stood, tall, silent, eternal. But now it was seen with different eyes. The people, once trembling in awe, began to look upon it not with fear or worship, but with a quiet understanding. They had built this order. They had given it their power, their obedience, their faith. And now, at last, they began to see its shadow. The narrator's voice softens into something weightless, almost like memory. Fear was our teacher, reason our guide, but power became our mirror. It was all there, the full circle of Hobbes's vision, from fear to reason, from reason to covenant, from covenant to peace, and from peace back to doubt. A perfect order, born from chaos, and yet, in its perfection, something fragile began to show. The shadow of peace was not war, it was forgetfulness. The forgetting of what it means to be human, to tremble, to hope, to dream beyond the walls that protect us. The world had found its calm, but calm is not the same as freedom. The narrator lets the pause stretch, like a breath held too long. In that stillness, a question hangs quietly. Was this the destiny Hobbes imagined, or merely its echo? Every philosophy, once lived, begins to reveal its cost. Hobbes had given a world a new vision of safety, but safety, like light, creates its own shadow. Every light of order casts a shadow of fear. It is the fear of losing what was built, the fear of change, the fear of waking from the comfort of law into the uncertainty of thought. The Leviathan, that great embodiment of reason, had not failed. It had succeeded too completely. Its peace had settled so deeply into the human heart that even the thought of questioning it felt dangerous. Yet somewhere beneath that peace, a quiet awareness remained. That power, once created, begins to shape its creator. The narrator speaks softly, the words falling like slow rain. Fear was our teacher, reason our guide, but power became our mirror. And in that mirror, humanity began to see itself again, not as victims, not as subjects, but as something far older, creatures who seek balance, not certainty. The circle was complete, yet never closed. Hobbes had shown the world how to end war, but he also revealed that peace is not an escape from fear, it is its transformation. The passions that incline men to peace, he wrote, are fear of death, desire of such things as are necessary to commodious living, and a hope by their industry to obtain them. Fear doesn't vanish, it evolves. What once made men fight now makes them build. What once divided them now binds them. But even the most perfect peace carries within it the seed of its undoing, for peace, too, is alive, and all living things cast shadows. The music hums faintly. The voice continues. Look closely at this circle. Fear gave birth to reason. Reason built order. Order created power. And power, inevitably, returned to fear. It is not a failure. It is a rhythm as old as human breath. In this rhythm, Hobbes found the deepest kind of wisdom. He did not dream of eternal freedom, nor promise everlasting safety. He only sought balance, a way for humanity to survive its own nature. His Leviathan was never meant to be a god, but a mirror held up to mankind, showing what we become when we are ruled not by chaos, but by clarity. The narrator breathes gently. Perhaps that is why Hobbes's philosophy still lingers, like an echo between centuries, not as a warning, but as a whisper, a reminder that peace is not permanent, that order is not free, and that the human heart must never forget its own contradictions. Every light of order casts a shadow of fear, and yet, within that shadow, something beautiful remains. The awareness that fear and peace are not enemies, but companions. One cannot exist without the other. Fear keeps peace alive. Peace gives fear its meaning. The two dance endlessly, shaping the story of civilization like waves shaping the shore. The Leviathan still breathes, but softly now. It is no longer the roaring god of war, nor the cold guardian of obedience. It has become something gentler, a presence, a structure, a quiet memory of what humanity once chose to believe. Its eyes, once filled with power, now reflect something more tender, the faces of those who built it. The narrator lowers his tone, like a lullaby fading into dusk. So perhaps the true peace Hobbes spoke of was never about the end of conflict, but about the acceptance of its shadow. To live with peace is to live with its twin, the fear of losing it. And yet, that fear is what keeps us awake, careful, alive. Fear was our teacher, reason our guide, but power became our mirror. The circle closes not with certainty, but with calm. The same calm that comes at the end of a long storm, not perfect stillness, but the steady rhythm of waves returning to shore. Humanity, at last, rests not because it has conquered fear, but because it has learned to live beside it. The music deepens, softer now, a pulse, a heartbeat. Every light of order casts a shadow of fear. Every shadow reminds us that peace is a choice renewed with every breath, and every breath, even in silence, carries both fear and freedom within it. The voice drifts into stillness, wrapping around the listener like twilight. Let this thought rest with you tonight, that order is not the end of chaos, but its most graceful form. That fear, once understood, is not an enemy, but a teacher still whispering in the dark. The world sleeps under the watch of its own creation. The Leviathan breathes quietly, and peace, fragile, beautiful, human, continues. The narrator's final words melt into the night, a soft farewell. Good night. The shadow of peace watches over you now. The storm has passed. What remains now is not triumph, but stillness. The Leviathan, that vast creation of reason and fear, stands quietly beneath the dim light of dawn. The world breathes again, calm and heavy with understanding. The narrator's voice flows like the slow rhythm of sleep. Every light of order casts a shadow of fear. Yet within that shadow, something new begins to take shape. Not rebellion, not defiance, but acceptance. Humanity, weary from centuries of chaos, has finally understood what Hobbes meant when he said, "The obligation of subjects to the sovereign is understood to last as long, and no longer, than the power lasteth by which he is able to protect them." Peace, then, is not the end of conflict. It is the art of living within it, of finding stillness inside necessity. The realization is tender but heavy. Peace has a cost. it is not paid in blood or tears, but in the quiet surrender of constant resistance. It asks for obedience, not as chains, but as rest. Peace has a cost. It is paid not in blood, but in silence. The words settle softly, like falling dust in a sunlit room. The people who once cried for safety now live within its embrace. They have learned to breathe with the Leviathan, to move with the rhythm of law. There is no more chaos, no more screams in the night, only the hum of structure, steady and unbroken. Yet this silence is not emptiness. It is the deep silence of understanding, the kind that comes after struggle, when the heart finally lets go of its need to fight everything it cannot control. It is the silence of maturity, the stillness of acceptance. The narrator pauses, a breath, long and slow. It was never about surrendering freedom, it was about transforming it. Hobbes taught that freedom without order is only another form of fear. In a world without laws, every man becomes both predator and prey. To live without authority is to return to the state of nature, a world of continual fear and danger of violent death. To escape that, we build peace, not as an escape from fear, but as its reconciliation. This is the quiet lesson of Hobbes. You cannot destroy power, because power is born from the same instinct that created you, the desire to live. You cannot outrun it, only learn to rest within its embrace. To resist endlessly is to remain in chaos. To accept wisely is to find calm. The voice deepens, gentle as dusk. Perhaps peace is not freedom, but a softer form of it, one that asks less of the world and more of our hearts. In this calm, humanity discovers a truth that all civilizations eventually face. There is no perfect balance between safety and liberty. Every generation must decide how much noise it can bear, how much silence it can afford. Some will always long for the wild air of rebellion. Others will find comfort in the measured breath of order. But all, in their own way, are still moved by the same pulse, the longing for peace. The narrator slows, almost whispering, "Peace has a cost. It is paid not in blood, but in silence. It is the price of breathing in harmony with others, of trusting that the hands which hold you will not tighten, but protect. It is the quiet discipline of choosing calm over chaos, not because chaos is evil, but because peace is heavy, and we are tired." In Hobbes's philosophy, this acceptance is not submission, it is wisdom. The understanding that perfection is impossible, and yet striving for stability is sacred. That reason, not faith, keeps the human spirit intact. That to live under law is not to lose yourself, but to find the rhythm that allows life to continue. The narrator's tone becomes tender, as if speaking directly to the listener's heart. Let your body rest. Let your mind unclench its grip on control. You are safe here, not because the world is gentle, but because you have learned how to breathe within it. This is the peace Hobbes dreamed of, a peace that hums quietly, built not on illusion, but on understanding. To live under Leviathan is to live under a sky that does not always shine, but always shelters. Its presence may be vast, its rules unyielding, but within them lies a kind of mercy, the mercy of order. Perhaps in accepting that we cannot escape power, we begin to reclaim our humanity. For the moment we stop fighting everything, we begin to listen. The moment we stop demanding the world to bend, we start to move with it. Peace, Hobbes might have said if he were here, is not a dream, it is a discipline. And so, the voice fades to a near whisper, calm, low, infinite. Peace has a cost. It is paid not in blood, but in silence. Silence becomes the new breath. The Leviathan watches, not as a tyrant, but as a quiet guardian. Its power no longer a threat, but a lullaby. Humanity has learned at last to rest within its own creation. The final words drift into the night, tender and still. To live in order is to rest in understanding. To accept peace is to accept yourself. The music fades into soft hums, as though the world itself exhales. Now, there is no more war, no more struggle, only the sound of reason sleeping. Good night, the narrator whispers gently. Rest within the calm you've built. The voice fades into a stillness that feels almost sacred. The storm of thought, the architecture of power, the long dialogue between fear and peace, all of it has quieted. What remains is breath, slow, rhythmic, infinite. The world of Hobbes, once full of motion and argument, now lies calm beneath the vast shadow of what humanity has built. It's Leviathan. The narrator's tone becomes as soft as the dark before dawn. Peace has a cost. It is paid, not in blood, but in silence. Now, that silence stretches, but it no longer feels heavy. It is the silence of safety, of understanding, of acceptance. Humanity has reached the end of its long reflection, not to destroy the Leviathan, but to rest within it. The voice returns, gentle and deliberate. Now let your thoughts rest beneath the great body of order. You are safe, even within its shadow. The words move like water, washing through the air. You can almost feel the world breathing, slow and deep, as if the very laws that once felt rigid are now alive. Pulsing softly under the skin of existence, the Leviathan, once imagined as a monstrous god of power, has become something else entirely, a mirror of peace, made not of fear, but of trust. In this moment, Hobbes's philosophy is no longer a theory, it is a lullaby. His logic becomes rhythm, his reason becomes rest. The idea that once held the world in awe now holds it gently, like an ocean cradling a sleeping ship. The narrator's voice lowers, intimate and warm. Do not fear the order you created. It breathes through you. For this was always the quiet truth behind Hobbes's thought, that the Leviathan is not separate from us. It is not a beast in the distance, nor a ruler above. It is the collective pulse of all who chose to live, to obey, to hope. It is not something to escape. It is something to understand. In Leviathan, Hobbes wrote, "For by art is created that great Leviathan called a commonwealth or state, which is but an artificial man." He never meant for it to be divine, only human, shaped by human hands. And like all things human, it carries both flaw and grace. So the story softens, not with finality, but with rest. The air feels thick with calm. The sound of distant strings fades like the tide. The listener, too, begins to drift, their breath matching the slow pulse of the narration. Peace, Hobbes reminds us, is not found in the absence of power, but in the harmony of it. To live beneath order is not to be crushed. It is to find shelter, rhythm, and stillness. The voice hums softly, like a thought dissolving into sleep. You are part of its calm. There is no more fear here. The same mind that once trembled at chaos now recognizes its reflection in stability. The Leviathan is not the enemy of the human spirit. It is its keeper, its boundary, its reminder that without structure, the soul can lose itself in endless noise. The narrator lingers on the breath. Inhale, exhale, the rhythm of reason itself. Each breath becomes a covenant renewed, the silent agreement between body and mind, between order and freedom. Do not fear the order you created. The voice repeats softly, almost fading into the hum of the background music. It breathes through you. The melody thins into nothingness, like mist dissolving over calm waters. In that quiet, the listener is left with only the sound of their own breathing, steady, gentle, alive. The same motion Hobbes once called the essence of life. For what is life but a motion of limbs? Now, the Leviathan no longer looms as a shadow of dominance, but floats as a presence of balance, vast and silent, yet filled with life. Humanity lies beneath it, not as subjects in submission, but as dreamers in its calm. The narrator smiles in voice alone, tones sinking into the whisper of night. You are safe, even within its shadow. It is the final reconciliation, not between fear and peace, but between thought and rest. The war within the mind is over. The questions no longer demand answers. They simply exist, floating like soft lights in darkness. Every law, every covenant, every act of surrender has led here, to this moment of stillness, where the mind and world breathe as one. Good night, child of peace. The words are almost inaudible now, drifting like the last line of a poem. The music fades until only silence remains, the same silence that opened the story, but transformed. No longer the silence of fear, but the silence of being. The Leviathan sleeps, and so does the world. Above it, the night stretches endlessly, calm, patient, whole. Beneath it, the listener drifts, no longer afraid, no longer searching. Reason hums quietly in the dark. Peace breathes softly through the body of order, and the voice, one last time, like a sigh. Good night, child of peace. The world has grown still again. What began in fear has settled into quiet understanding. Humanity, once lost in the noise of survival, now drifts within the calm it created. The Leviathan no longer feels distant or cold. It breathes softly, like a steady tide resting against the shore. Each law, each silent agreement, each shared hope has become part of a rhythm that holds us all. It is not the rhythm of power, but of trust, fragile, human, and alive. Hobbes once wrote that peace is born not from love, but from the wisdom of fear. And tonight, that wisdom feels less like surrender and more like rest. The great order hums gently around you now, not as a cage, but as a lullaby. The same hands that built the Leviathan built the world you sleep in. Its weight no longer presses, it protects. So breathe slowly. Let the air move easily through you. There is nothing to resist, nothing to chase. Only stillness. Only safety. The storm has passed, and reason has become a quiet light in the dark. Let it fade softly into your dreams. Sleep peacefully. Child of calm. You are safe within the order you helped create. Good night.